Hello and welcome to the first ever Ardent Regeneration and Development podcast. My name is Rob Quaile and I'm a director at Ardent and I will be hosting the series. So the idea behind this Fresh Face podcast is to host guests from across the regeneration and development industry and to talk about key issues and topics that impact the sector and to get views from some different voices. That could be surveyors, lawyers, planners, project managers, public bodies, private developers, local authorities. I think you can take from that list, it could really be anyone. The only important thing is that the focus of their work is bringing about transformational regeneration. Our team is aiming to bring regular podcast episodes with different themes throughout the year. And our first episode topic is going to be about the UK's Real Estate Investment and Infrastructure Forum, otherwise known as, and more conveniently titled, UKREiiF. UKREiiF starting to rival MIFIN's attendance numbers with over 12,000 official attendees signed up, and I understand a ton more that are attending fringe events. So it is increasingly gathering a mammoth following, and it's much easier to attend for those of us based in the UK, and has a diverse attendance from people working on all the various stages involved in development and regeneration, both private and public sector alike. Plus, if that wasn't enough to whet the appetite, my Yorkshire-born colleagues insist that Leeds is the Cannes of the UK and can rival anything that it has to offer. So the purpose of this first podcast will be to firstly just briefly introduce Ardent and what we do and who we are, talk about UKREiiF from our perspective. I'll then interview a couple of attendees from Ardent and then guests from within the industry who are attending, so that we can give a flavour of the key themes and main takeaways from the event this year, particularly for those who weren't able to attend, and the positives and negatives about the event. So with that in mind, and with no more waffle from me, I'll introduce the first guest. Thank you in advance for listening, and we hope you enjoy the inaugural Ardent Regeneration and Development podcast episode. So our first interview is with John Stott, Ardent's Group Managing Director. John actually started his career at Ardent and was at the company for, I think, almost a decade before following new opportunities. He returned a couple of years ago as Group Managing Director with a mandate to lead the growth and development of Ardent. So John, welcome. Thank you very much for coming to speak to us on the podcast.
Thanks, Rob. Good to be here.
So I guess the first question I probably could have answered myself, but I thought upwards delegation, who better than the Group Managing Director? So since it's our first podcast, could you tell the listeners who might not have come across us yet or only in a specific area who, what and where Ardent is?
Yeah, sure. So we're a land, consent management and engagement consultancy. We work across the UK and Ireland. We've got offices in London and Birmingham, Warrington, Leeds, Glasgow and Dublin. And we're about 170 people strong and growing quickly. We work on a lot of the UK's highest profile regeneration and infrastructure projects.
Great. And how has Ardent changed since, when you were first at Ardent? I'm not going to put an exact year on it and age you, but from then until you've returned a couple of years ago.
Well, I think when I first joined, I was the 8th person into the business, and then we grew it to 20-odd people around the time when I left. I think that was perhaps 2013. And then when I returned 18 months ago, it had grown to 120 people. So a lot of growth happened whilst I was elsewhere. And we've kicked on from there. And we're offering a broader range of services now. So we work primarily land and property services, but we're now offering the consent management services and the engagement services, and doing a lot of work in Scotland and a lot of work in Ireland. So yeah, it's helped us to grow, and we're, say, 170 people strong now.
Yeah, wow. That's an amazing amount of growth. And I guess if your mandate is to continue that growth, hopefully we'll just continue to see that kind of exponentially increasing in the next 5-10 years, or 1 year even.
We want to try and help to bring about life improving change on projects. And yeah, we're working across regeneration, renewables, utilities and transport sectors, looking at growth beyond the UK and Ireland as well. So we think there's a lot more we can do and continue to grow and enjoy it.
The topic of this podcast and the theme of it is UKREiiF. Why, in your opinion, are we attending, and what do you think the point of it is as an event?
So it's a brilliant opportunity to see a lot of clients all in one place at the same time, a lot of prospective clients, whether that's local authorities, private sector developers, lots of other project partners as well. So lots of firms we work with, whether it's planners or solicitors, all in one place, all together for 3 or 4 days, all coming together for network. And that's an opportunity we can't miss out on.
Yeah, so how many times have you been, and why do you think it does seem to be gaining in popularity? Why do you think that is?
This will be our 3rd year attending in Leeds as well, for the 3rd year. So I think, to be fair, I think they've done a brilliant job marketing the event, and a lot of people have got behind it and seen the benefits, what's happened in terms of the announcements that have happened around big regeneration projects, the deals that have been perhaps got over the line through the right people being in the right place together for a few days, really focused on getting things done. I think that's happened well over the past couple of years. We still go to MIPIM as well, but I think a lot of people perhaps are looking at UKREiiF as something that may replace MIPIM, and perhaps has replaced MIPIM for certain organisations. I think that there's still benefit in going to both for now, but we'll continue to keep that under review. But I mean, 12,000 people, 12,000 delegates.
What positives have you found personally from attending UKREiiF?
I think the thing with these sorts of events is that, you can spend an awful lot of time going and trying to arrange meetings with lots of clients and lots of key contacts outside of something like UKREiiF. And it might take you 3 to 6 months to manage to arrange and hold all of the meetings that you can perhaps hold within 3 or 4 days in one place, because everybody's there for the same purpose. So to me, that's a massive benefit. It's a lot of hard work, and you're about and about from 7 in the morning until perhaps midnight, seeing people, meeting people, but you get a huge amount out of it. So it's a good opportunity to be there and meet new people too.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Just knowing that people are in the same place at the same time, rather than having to go forwards and backwards on emails, doing the diary lottery, trying to find a spot when you might be in the same city, town at the same time. You know that they're going to be in Leeds, and people do get quite busy, but that everyone is there for a purpose. And do you find that it is mostly about the networking, or do you spend much time attending the events as well? And how have those been, in your opinion?
I think it's a good opportunity to balance what you're doing when you're there. So there are lots and lots of really good sessions that are being held during the main conference, but also outside of it as well.
I don't think I appreciated before being signed up to go, like the sheer number of contacts and colleagues and clients that do go, and actually trying to fit all that in and trying to go to some of the key events is quite a difficult thing to manage. But I guess it's a more positive than a negative, because at least it's well represented and something that's going to have a lot of focus.
Yeah, I think so. You probably got to recognise when you go into these sorts of things, you won't get a chance to see everybody who you want to see. It's just not possible, I don't think, with the sheer numbers of people. But I think one of the other key things to remember is to make sure you book time in the diary the following week to make sure you're following up with people. As a business, over sort of 30 years in existence, an awful lot of what we've done has been in the infrastructure space. So initially, a lot of that was in the transport space. We've extended services to really help in the renewables and utilities space as well. But a big focus of UKREiiF is regeneration. So town centre regeneration, we've got people like yourself, Rob, John Sayer, various other people who've joined us with a really strong regeneration background, really good experience, working with lots of private sector developers already, working with quite a number of local authorities to help with land assembly, development viability, using compulsory purchase powers. We know it's been tough in the regeneration sector for the past couple of years or so, but we see, with an expectation of a new government around the corner, new policies coming into place, and hopefully economic improvement over the next year or 18 months, we expect that market to start ramping up. So for us, a key thing is we want to raise our profile in that space.
Yeah, and it seems like there are lots of people going with that key focus who are passionate about that transformational change and improving communities and delivering housing. And it does seem like there's a lot of positivity in the sector now. And I think that will just increase over the next 12 months. I think it's going to be exciting. I think that is all that I'm going to ask you this morning, and I'll let you have some of your Sunday back. Thank you very much for joining us and speaking on the podcast.
Have a good one.
My next interview is with Cathy Palmer, Director of Regeneration Delivery at Walker Sime. Before taking on this role, Cathy worked as Head of Regeneration Delivery at Wirral Council and Programme Manager at Bolton Town Centre's Regeneration, as well as a number of other roles, including a significant stint in the real estate team at Deloitte. But Cathy, welcome to the podcast, and thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for the introduction.
You joined Walker Sime, I think, just under a year ago now. Do you tell us a bit more about your role and the focus of your team and what your mandate is there?
Yes, you're right. I joined Walker Sime in November last year, and started a Regeneration Delivery business. And it's my job now to grow that business within Walker Sime. Regeneration Delivery is all about helping get projects off the ground. So one of my sort of key skills is moving things from strategy into delivery phase. So that involves working with local authorities in regeneration departments and also with developers who like working quite closely with local authorities.
Well, it sounds interesting. And you've worked in key regeneration roles in both public and private sector. Do you think it's helped you to have worked on both sides of the public sector scheme and consulting side of projects? And what did you learn from that experience that you're taking into your role now?
Yes, so I've spent the first 11 years of my career working for the private sector. So I trained as a planning and development surveyor and got my professional qualification whilst working for Deloitte. And in that role, I was working as a consultant. So my clients were local authorities, but it's only really when you get to work inside a local authority, where I worked for the past 4 years previous to joining Walker Sime, that you can fully get to understand all of the different challenges, frustrations, and opportunities that role has. It's quite a privileged position, I think, to work inside a local authority. You get a fair amount of control over budget. You can sort of set the direction for project. You can choose different consultants to work with, and you get to engage with quite a wide range of stakeholders, community included. And that for me was really, really fulfilling as a role. But I'm now back to working in the private sector, which again has its advantages. And I'm keen to sort of sit there and bridge that gap really between the public and the private sector.
Yeah, and you've had that perfect opportunity to get really close to projects, communities, members, understanding, all of the ins and outs and intricacies of your projects. And then you get to take that experience now into a private sector delivery role, which I guess stands you in very good stead. And it must have been an interesting period of time, definitely over the. Did you say it was 4 years that you've been public sector side before Walker Sime?
Yeah, it was after I spent 3 years working for Wirral Council, and it was a year working for Bolton Council. And yeah, you're right. I think one of the sort of the key takeaways that I've had from that time really is how you can sort of make regeneration happen with the community to make much more successful regeneration projects rather than just kind of landing in with some preconceived ideas of what's going to work in that location. So yes, a lot of my work that I'm now sort of focusing on is around doing really thoughtful placemaking and doing it with the community.
That's brilliant. Okay. So introducing the theme of this episode of the podcast, we're focusing on UKREiiF. You seem to be very busy during the week, and we did get the opportunity to catch up there. How did you find the event, and what were your main takeaways from the week?
I thought it was fantastic. I sort of had the full 3 days there, by Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, a very rainy Wednesday, which was hard work from a weather sense, but it was probably my favourite day in terms of I got to sit on 2 panel sessions. I packed my diary up quite a lot, but in actual fact, I did have some sort of gaps between things to kind of wander around and bump into people. I'll definitely be going next year. And dare I say it might be that, instead of MIPIM.
Yeah, and that's something I've heard from quite a lot of people. I think the access and how easy it is to get to UKREiiF, but also, and I've not been to MIPIM, so it's hard for me to make a fair comparison, but it just seemed to have a perfect balance of interesting panel sessions, different topic areas, and there were very clear topic areas on the different sessions. You sat on a number of panel sessions, one called Inclusive Impact, Less Talk, More Real Change. The focus of that session was on regenerative design and the importance of that on communities. What were kind of the key takeaways of that session, and why is that so important to successful regeneration?
Well, I think the reason why I got asked to sort of sit on that panel, apparently, so I'm told, is because I'm known as somebody that gets things done. I really wanted to sort of use that platform as a way of sort of expressing that as a bit of a mantra. Sometimes you just kind of got to get on and get things moving. And I think with some local authorities, it can be really, really difficult to do that. You'll get lots of different challenges that come in your way, but one of the main skills as a regeneration practitioner is resilience and tenacity and belief in a project, because you'll often find that if you don't push it on in regen, then it won't happen, and those communities won't benefit from the opportunities for change that exist. It was a nice sort of varied sort of discussion with that one. I think particularly I remember Pooja from public practice having some really sort of some different kind of thinking around how different kind of skill sets can sort of contribute to positive change. I think that particularly stood out for me.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it? And it came up in your second panel session on creating healthy towns and cities, where a lot of the focus went on to the importance of delivering, making change, and engaging with the community. And there was a discussion about regeneration fatigue, where we're looking at, and you would have experienced this at your time at Wirral Council, where communities have been told for decades that regeneration is going to come forward.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I see it quite often that trust has broken down between the community and local authorities because of failed attempts in the past, and just because of general, underfunding in local government has meant that the regen teams haven't been able to be out there in force, sort of communicating with everyone. So that can be quite difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And so the rest of the focus on your second session was on creating healthy towns or healthy regeneration. Why do you think it's so important, and how do we ensure that schemes are designed properly to ensure that healthy ambitions are met?
Yeah, it's around health and equality for me. So firstly, it's around, your physical environment is one of the biggest determinants of your health outcomes in later life. So it's important to build places that, damp free and people can access healthy food so that they don't, fall into the trap of obesity. But secondly, I think it's around just sort of from a local government perspective. If you don't create places that are healthy, you're lessening you're putting a burden in the future on the need for services. So it's a resilience point for local authorities really as well, and just sort of trying to make sure that you're kind of protecting future budgets as well.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting, and that's an interesting perspective on it. That it's future proofing and resilience and creating, actually reducing burden on services, more long term.
And one of the key takeaways I had was from Paul Richards as well, who he puts a lot of a focus on creating job opportunities for people, because as well as buildings, if you have people in jobs and they're working, they've got a higher income.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cathy, for chatting to us and giving up your time. That was really interesting.
Good. Thank you.
My next interview is with Ian Piper, the CEO of Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. Ian has held a raft of interesting roles in development and regeneration, leading to his current position, including acting as Director of Development at Southwest Regional Development Agency, Chief Executive of Forward Swindon, and Head of Land at the Homes and Community Agency, now of course Homes England. Welcome, Ian, and thank you for joining our first podcast.
Hi, Rob. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to take part.
So I wanted to start really by asking if you could tell us a bit more about Ebbsfleet Development Corporation and what it was set up to deliver, and where you are in meeting those objectives.
Yeah, of course. So Ebbsfleet Development Corporation is what I call a statutory development corporation. We were set up by the government in 2015. We're constituted under the Housing and Planning Act 1980, so under the same legislation that established the London Docklands Development Corporation, the Black Country Development Corporation, and so on. So the same legislation, very much the same sort of governance arrangements. We are directly accountable to the Secretary of State for the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities. We were established to transform and regenerate the area of Ebbsfleet around Ebbsfleet International Station. It sits in North Kent between Dartford and Gravesham. It's an area of former chalk quarrying, which was used in the cement manufacturing industry. So it's a very sort of post-industrial landscape with deep quarries and chalk cliffs. And when the quarrying stopped, the private landowners, working with some of the developers, including, got outline planning permission for about 12,500 new homes. We determined, in accordance with the local plan policies of Dartford and Gravesham, the overall vision is for up to 15,000 new homes, plus everything that needs to be provided to go along and support those new communities. In terms of where we are at the moment, we celebrated the completion of 4,000 homes in January of this year. So about a third of the way through, and we're completing new homes at the rate of somewhere between 600 and 650 a year, which makes it, if not the fastest, one of the fastest growing communities in the country.
It's amazing. That's a lot of homes, and I guess it helps that Ebbsfleet has such a good station into London that you have the infrastructure there, so there must be significant demand from residents moving into the area.
Yeah, so the transport links are terrific. As you say, we have the high-speed line into St Pancras right on the doorstep, so it's 18 minutes from Ebbsfleet to St Pancras. There are other rail lines as well, so you can catch the North Kent line into Charing Cross. You can get quite easily into Victoria as well. So yeah, very well connected, just off the M25, which is a blessing and can be a curse, of course, if that gets congested, but very well located for the Channel ports, the wider southeast. So demand for homes has been really strong over the last 4 or 5 years. It's probably slowed a little bit in the last 12 months.
But yeah, and I always think you can't get a better stamp of approval than from the local community wanting to move into the development or regeneration that you're providing. So that's always really exciting to see. So the theme of this podcast, Ian, is UKREiiF, which I know that you attended last week. What opportunities do you think that UKREiiF presents for local authorities, development corporations? I'm thinking more, public sector organisations.
So we're particularly keen to raise the profile of investing in Ebbsfleet, and that's probably the principal reason that we would attend an event like UKREiiF. So the opportunity to meet developers, investors, banks who may not have considered Ebbsfleet before as an opportunity to develop. And so we get the opportunity over quite an intensive 2 or 3 days where we can meet those types of investors, sit down in quite an informal sitting over a coffee and discuss the possibilities and that Ebbsfleet presents. And in particular, we like to talk about Ebbsfleet Central, which is a large major mixed-use scheme that we are.
Fringe events, I think, were popular, and I think are going to be even more popular probably next year. So in the Green Print for Growth session, that was the Thames Estuary session, what did the discussion focus on there?
I attended that with Harlow and Gilston Garden Settlement, and we're talking about sort of common issues really in terms of the delivery challenges that we face when you're delivering large scale development such as that. So I think one of those for us, which was discussed, partly because Homes England were also on the panel, and somebody from Joe Key, the Director General from the Department for Levelling Up and Housing and Communities, is the funding certainty that you have over what period of time. So I've been a strong sort of advocate of having greater funding certainty over a longer period of time. if you're delivering a place over 20 odd years, which is what it will be in Ebbsfleet, it's quite challenging to do that when you only have certainty of funding for 1, 2, 3 years.
No, that's an interesting one, and it's something I heard come up in a number of sessions. I guess the other key topics within kind of looking at housing crisis and housing delivery at the moment is viability and inflation on build costs. Is that something that impacts you the same way as it would a private sector developer?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're delivering elements Ebbsfleet ourselves, so we would be a client for some of the construction activities. We intend to act as the master developer across Ebbsfleet Central. So those viability challenges, affect us quite a lot. Just in terms of construction cost inflation, we're looking to invest in community facilities to enhance perhaps what a developer is required to do under a Section 106, and actually, or we're intent on doing something directly ourselves anyway. And of course, over the last 12, 18 months, costs have gone up 25, 30, 40%. That means we have to undertake a reappraisal of the scheme, the investment. We have to do a new business case. We have to get an increased approval. That takes time. And sometimes the value for money that we need to demonstrate by public sector investment is affected by that, which makes it harder for us to do. So it not only it's a time element because it puts the delivery back because we have to go back and reappraise, but also some schemes can fall by the wayside because those extra costs mean they're no longer value for money.
Yeah, which just feeds in more and more to lack of housing being provided across the country.
Yeah, exactly. And importantly for somewhere like Ebbsfleet, the potentially a lack of the support facilities, the community facilities, the social facilities, etc., which you can't build the homes without those facilities. So, if we're going to create great places, which is what we are trying to do, then you have to provide those facilities, that infrastructure, alongside the new homes.
Yeah, I just think it's important from getting a planning approval anyway, but even from a long-lasting community point of view, as you point out, Ian, those kind of facilities and creating places that people want to stay is the key to a long-lasting, say, garden settlement in this example, rather than just housing for housing's sake, which will go out of date or become unpopular because there's no sense of place actually being created.
Absolutely. And I often say, I think it's one of our biggest challenges at Ebbsfleet, and it will be for other places as well, that getting the alignment of the infrastructure and the facilities alongside the new residents arriving and moving in, and that community growing is one of our biggest challenges. And you don't want some of the infrastructure in too early. Because it's unviable, to run bus services or to run other things if there's nobody living there. Although there are some advantages to that, but neither do you want it too late. So it's trying to time the delivery of those pieces of vital services at the moment that the residents need it most.
Yeah, it's a very difficult balance, isn't it? Well, thank you very much for your time. I think if I could ask you one last question. Was there an event or session that you weren't a panelist at that you particularly enjoyed that you got to attend?
I think for me, probably I wouldn't single out one. I think the thing that I enjoy most about UKREiiF is I personally, you're meeting and bumping into people across the sector, some of whom you've known well, but maybe haven't seen for quite a long time. It's an opportunity to catch up with a lot of people in quite a short space of time.
I completely agree that the bumping into and the organised coffees and drinks mean that you're constantly, I found from my perspective, I was constantly learning from other people about how they're delivering schemes, but also really reviewing myself, how I'm working, because you're speaking about it so often. I particularly enjoyed that the general election was announced when we were there, because I spent that day going to quite a few politically charge sessions from parliamentary prospective candidates. So it was an interesting thing to see and an interesting thing to hear about different parties' views on housing delivery in the planning system.
Indeed. Yeah.
Okay, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for joining and providing your insights. My final interview in this episode is with John Sayer, the head of regeneration and development at Ardent. So welcome, John.
Hello.
I wanted to talk to you about your experiences of UKREiiF this year and the key themes that arose and I guess predictions for the year. So how did you enjoy your second visit to UKREiiF and how did you spend your time during the event?
For me, you've got this fantastic mix of you've got panel sessions and you've then got various sort of displays. I think one of the really, really critical things that really comes out of these events for me is actually in a world where we do a lot of things online, where we're meeting clients and our network on Teams, the ability to actually see a significant number of people in one place, whether they're clients, they are part of our professional network, or whether it's being introduced to new people as well. I find that is a really, really valuable part of the experience.
It's quite a rare opportunity, isn't it? And to have, my experience personally was that there were local authorities from throughout the UK, and there were developers that were involved in a whole multitude of types of development. Was that quite eye-opening in terms of the level of activity going on?
I think that volume of people arriving en masse shows you whether you're public sector, whether you're a developer, whether you're in the advisory business, that actually attending this event is an absolute must in the calendar.
Yeah, and probably a bit easier for example, local authorities to justify a trip up to Leeds than perhaps a trip over to MIPIM. So what were the main positives you felt from attending? Was it sheer massive numbers or were there any other positives you felt? And were there any differences from, say, the year before when you attended?
I think the positivity is one about those personal relationships that you can build when you're face to face with people and those new ones that you can create and those particularly those organic conversations that you have with people. Because in my experience, often the aside conversations that would historically take place to or from a meeting with a client or a professional referrer, they don't take place in the same way on Zoom or Teams. And actually this location is getting a big group of people together and to be able to have discussions and collaborate is a really important part of the event. And I see a lot of people attending for those networking opportunities.
I completely agree. It really focuses minds on talking about key issues within the sector. I mean, most of the people I spoke to weren't based in London, but even clients and contacts and colleagues that are based in London, the conversations were different because of the context of where we were having them and conversations around topics coming out of panel sessions. Were there any negatives that you came across or you personally felt?
I think probably the only point that I would raise is particularly some of the really, really high profile panel sessions or speakers. It can be very, very difficult to get into those sessions. And I know that some of them you pre-book and so on. But I think maybe for some of those really, really high profile sessions, there perhaps needs to be a bigger space to hold those. And I know that the current venue, there is a theatre in there, but it's probably not big enough to hold a significant audience. So I think that perhaps for me has frustrated me on one or two occasions.
Yeah, definitely. So talking more about sessions or events that you attended, were there any that were particularly interesting or different to the norm that you got to go and visit?
I think one in particular that was a little bit different that I put my hand up to go along to was that Regeneration Brainery undertook a reverse mentoring session. And for those not familiar, Regeneration Brainery are an organisation who are seeking to bring training opportunities and awareness to young people, and particularly to sort of create diversity within the property industry going forward. So I attended a session with them and I was reverse mentored by two different young people, which was quite an interesting experience.
Okay.
Some of the sort of I suppose the key takeaways of that was actually thinking about barriers to entry into the property industry. And some of the messaging around that was how people were saying how property as a profession just simply isn't visible when you're a young person, or perhaps that there is a certain stereotype and expectation of a certain type of person from a certain background who is going to fit into the. What was quite interesting was that one of the sessions I did was by someone who's currently doing a placement in one of the sort of national consultancies. And he was telling me that actually he had all of those preconceptions about what people within a sort of property advisory business would be like. And he said, having now joined one, his preconceptions were completely unfounded, which was actually quite heartening and quite uplifting. But I suppose the problem being is that messaging clearly isn't getting out that property is full of a broader mix of people than some people might naturally assume.
And what was it that Regeneration Brainery was saying needs to change? Is it obviously access requirements? I think I saw a post about perhaps more focus on apprenticeships, but are they looking for internships, work experience, people going to schools and universities to talk about the industry? What's their kind of focus, or is it all of the above?
Yeah, no, it's definitely all of that, and I think that they're a not-for-profit organisation, and they actually need the industry support, whether that's the full power or the financial support as well. But certainly this was my first sort of key interaction with them as a group. And it was really, really impressive to meet the young people and future talent. And definitely from what I experienced there as an industry, it's absolutely vital that we support these kinds of schemes and make sure that we have access to the best talent to make sure that as a profession we thrive going forward.
Brilliant. That's really interesting, and great that they were there to sit alongside all the other key issues within the sector that we'll go on to talk about. Obviously, diversity within the people working within the industry is incredibly important, and something that we often talk about in regeneration and development, that the more you can understand the community based in an area that you're trying to regenerate, the better. Moving on to Ardent. So we were there as a company. You hosted a regeneration roundtable this year. Could you give us a flavour of what the key topics were that came out of the roundtable, and any predictions for the year ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the first year that we posted a roundtable, and that was off the back of having moved office within Leeds within the last 12 months. So we've grown significantly our presence in Leeds and our service offering. And we wanted to take it as a bit of an opportunity to use the new office premises and to meet with clients and our professional network. So we were lucky to host an event. We had a mix of people, one or two local authorities, such as representation from Leeds City Council. We also had developers in the room, such as London Continental Railways, Moda, and also some of our professional network, including plan, as well as lawyers. So we had a good mix of people in the room. I think one of the key takeaways from that was actually about key to delivery going forward is actually the planning process. And you hear a lot in the press about people saying, well, the planning process doesn't work. It needs to be changed. It needs streamlining. And for many years, it feels as if there's always been a bit of a tinkering at the edges. But one of the key themes that came out of our roundtable was actually people would really like to see the current system properly resourced, properly funded, and running correctly. And that was a key theme really in terms of before we start worrying about making changes, actually, how do we get the system to run properly? One interesting point that was raised, particularly where people are bringing sort of overseas funders in, is how planning committees are now, it's very easy to access that, watching them online. And it actually creates a bit of a shop window in terms of investors are able to watch that. In some cases, have seen planning matters not handled in a particularly positive way. In some cases, investors are making decisions to not invest in certain areas because of how the planning process is deployed and operates in that location. So the key takeaway was about getting the planning system properly up and running in order to be able to help us deliver in reality on what is a housing crisis.
Yeah, okay. That's really interesting. And I guess a particularly interesting topic in light of the fact that the general election was announced while we're at UKREiiF. And so the way that planning is resourced or investment within the public sector space there might change if there's a change of government, or, there will be a new Secretary of State with Michael Gove announcing that he's going to step down, even if the Conservative Party did win the election. So we're clearly going to see changes here, and with other elements of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act being implemented through secondary legislation. So alongside the planning resourcing, through your conversations that you had at UKREiiF more generally, what do you think the key talking points are going to be in the year ahead in terms of regeneration and development, and any barriers or stimulus for the sector?
I think one thing that the industry's crying out for is stability. We've been through a fairly challenging few years as a nation, so people actually want things to be a little bit more stable. In terms of where do we see pushing forward, I think that, particularly having had the outcome from Angela Rayner's speech that she delivered during UKREiiF, it's clearly going to be a push on brownfield, assuming that Labour are forming the new government. There's also the push for new towns as well. And of course, all of the delivery of that needs a planning system that works properly. I mean, in terms of some of my thoughts and conversations I've had with people, I think there's a possibility on the horizon that the Labour government might seek to broaden this application of hope value in compulsory acquisition, which initially was brought in by the current government under the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. So I think there's probably going to be some of that possibly on the horizon. But I think it's also quite critical that they're considering how do they create that stable environment so that we can get houses being built quickly. And that's, I think, one of the big challenges is that it doesn't matter which government comes in, there isn't a quick and easy fix to the housing challenge that we're presented with.
Yeah, that's interesting, and definitely something that in my experience of going to panel sessions came up time and time again was delivery, speed, and size. A lot of talk about quantum of affordable housing being provided rather than strict focus on percentages of affordable housing being provided. And I saw the prospective parliamentary candidate for Barking who referred to us being in the worst housing position ever since Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist, and repeatedly, and I think Angela Rayner did the same, actually repeatedly focusing on delivery of housing in post-war periods and how that was done on the right kind of scale, and trying to return to that as a blueprint for large-scale housing delivery. And I did see that today you posted a helpful article on Labour's housing policy that, within the early manifesto, I guess, and then how many houses they're going to deliver and how they're going to do that. But I guess the devil's in the detail, and at the moment it seems to be focused on new towns and brownfield regeneration, as you say.
It is. I mean, it's a bold ambition that they put out there, and it certainly needs bold ambition to deliver on that scale. But it's always the case that the devil will be in the detail.
And it does seem, I mean, the implied, I guess, point on this hope value disapplication is that Labour see the route, or a route, to large-scale housing delivery as being through compulsory purchase, which was kind of the undercurrent within the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, and a view held by Michael Gove. So do you see CPO becoming a more important tool in the next few years?
I definitely think that government will look to use compulsory purchase powers more. I think I do have some concerns around some of the challenges that disapplying hope value would bring about.
John, thank you very much for coming to speak on the podcast. Hopefully you'll be a recurring guest to talk all things regeneration and development. Thank you very much for joining this first podcast and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Nice to speak, Rob. Thank you.
So there we have it. Some brilliant insights from colleagues and guests from across the industry on UKREiiF, and some key themes for the year ahead. Do get in touch if you'd like to join the debate. For now, thank you again for listening, and join us again soon for some Ardent insights on regeneration and development.